Hi everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Today my topic is Enchantresses and Agency, Female Power from Caccini to Handel. And I like to focus on an opera character you may or may not already know, Alcina. I will be looking at two operas from the Baroque period, Francesca Caccini's La liberazione di Ruggiero dall'isola d'Alcina, which means the liberation of Ruggiero from Alcina's island from 1625, and Handel's Alcina from 1735. Alcina is an enchantress who rules a magical island. She is known for seducing the knights who arrive there and transforming her former lovers to plants, rocks, and monsters. But with Ruggiero, the story becomes more complicated. She draws him into a world of beauty, pleasure, and illusion. On her island, he forgets the life he came from, his responsibilities, and the woman he's supposed to return to. But that enchanted world doesn't last forever. Eventually, another force enters this story, a force connected with reason, order, and truth. In Caccini's opera, that force takes a form of another powerful woman, Melissa. In Handel's opera, the structure is a little bit different, but the result is similar. Alcina's illusion begins to fail. Ruggiero sees clearly again, and he leaves this island. So, on the surface, Alcina may seem like a familiar operatic figure, a powerful and dangerous woman whose world eventually falls apart. But what becomes much more interesting is how differently these two operas imagine that same woman. So, rather than trying to define who Alcina is right away, I'd like to take a step back and look at the words that produced her. Because the way power is imagined in these operas is not accidental. It's shaped by historical context, dramatical structure, and the way music gives form to female authority. Before turning to the music itself, I want to begin with the word that made this Caccini's opera possible. Francesca Caccini's La liberazione di Ruggiero was premiered in Florence in 1625. As a Medici court, that background matters because this opera was created at a moment when political power in Florence was closely connected to female patronage. During Maria Maddalena of Austria Regency, Florence experienced one of the most musical active decades of the early 17th century. She commissioned many works concerned on famous female heroines in order to assert women's place in politics. So in that context, La liberazione di Ruggiero was not just a court entertainment, it was also part of larger cultural and political project. This picture helps us see that word more clearly. This opera was staged at Villa Poggio Imperiale, a residence close associated with Maria Maddalena, and the performance even ended with an equestrian ballet. So what this picture shows is not only the performance itself, but the villa as a political and ceremonial space. In other words, this opera belonged from the beginning to a much larger court spectacle. Once we see that, it becomes easy to understand why this opera places women so centrally on stage. This dramatic world was shaped from the beginning by female patronage and court politics. So its emphasis on female characters, female power, and female conflict is not accidental. What we see on stage is not just one powerful woman, but a wider female world. From the beginning, female presence helps shape the dramatic world itself. Francesca Caccini herself is just as important as the woman in this story. She was not only a successful court musician, she was also one of the very few women of her time able to move beyond performance and teaching in large-scale composition. La liberazione di Ruggiero is especially important because it's generally considered the first surviving opera composed by a woman. So that's not simply a story about a female character, but a work shaped by powerful women, written by a woman composer, and built around questions of female authority. That also makes the choice of subject especially meaningful. Why Alcina? Because Alcina is not just a villain, she represents a form of power. Her authority comes from her ability to create an entire world around herself, a world of beauty, temptation, pleasure, and illusion. But this opera doesn't simply oppose a dangerous woman and a heroic man. Instead, it places Alcina in conflict with another powerful woman, Melissa. So the central struggle of the opera is not man hero versus female seductress. It's one form of female power confronting another. That structure reflects a culture in which female power was visible, active, and politically meaningful. The next question then is how Caccini built that world on stage, and how music turns enchantment into a shared theatrical space. Caccini built that world on stage by refusing to let Alcina stand alone. Although Alcina is central, her authority is spread across multiple voices and figures. And through these voices, enchantment becomes not just something Alcina processes, but a shared dramatic space. We can hear the beginning of that process in the duet between Alcina and Ruggiero. On the surface, it's a love scene, but dramatically, it also shows that Alcina's authority is relational rather than isolated. Just as importantly, her musical writing here remains strongly speech-like or recitative-like. Even in a love scene, Caccini doesn't give her a fully self-contained lyrical area. Her authority still comes through rhetorical declamation, exchange, and dramatic immediacy. To make that relation structure audible, I'd like to sing a short excerpt from the duet between Alcina and Ruggiero. I will sing only Alcina's line, while my pianist represents Ruggiero at the piano, and I highlighted Ruggiero's word. You can see even in the intimate duet, Alcina's power already depends on a larger relation structure, but Caccini doesn't stop there. After the duet, the scene opens outward. A chorus, 2 female attendants, and the shepherd continue to sing in praise of love. So enchantment spreads beyond Alcina herself, and the island begins to sound like an intention of her power. That progression matters because enchantment in this opera is not confined to Alcina herself. It spreads outward through other voices, and the island begins to sound like an intention of her power. And this is the moment in which the siren enters. The siren may seem unnecessary since Ruggiero has already been seduced, but dramatically, her role is essential. She intensifies what the duet has begun and amplifies an enchantment already in motion. At the same time, the siren doesn't occupy the same level of authority as Alcina. She belongs a lower social and rhetorical level. Her music is more constructed, more song-like or aria-like, and closer to a canzonetta than the freer, more forceful dramatic declamation that shapes Alcina's musical language through most of the opera. That difference suggests that Caccini is building a hierarchy of female speech on stage. Now I'd like to sing the siren's part, so you can hear how this enchantment moves outward, but begin as a duet between 2 lovers, now becomes part of a much larger sound world.
Vamos
Here you can hear that the siren doesn't replace Alcina's authority, but extends it in a different register. Alcina's power and the siren's power are not the same. Alcina stands closer to dramatic command, while the siren works through ornament, sweetness, and repetition. But the siren still participates in the same world of feminine persuasion and sonic enchantment. She doesn't replace Alcina, she extends the world Alcina controls. That's why I find it's useful to think of Caccini's Alcina not simply as a woman with magic power, but as the center of a distributed system of female voices. This is also one of the places where Handel's opera begins to differ quite clearly. In Handel's Alcina, we no longer find the same outward expansion through some small roles like female attendants and siren. Handel does give Alcina a female counterpart in the role Morgana, but Morgana functions as a dramatic character in her own right, not as an extension of Alcina's sonic world. So the female network remains, but is reorganized, less atmospheric and special, and more focused on individual characters and their desires. At the center of Caccini's opera is not a conflict between a heroic man and a dangerous woman, but a conflict between two women. Alcina represents one kind of power. Her authority is built through pleasure, seduction, illusion, and the creation of an enchanted world. Melissa represents a very different kind of power. She is also a sorceress, but she doesn't seduce. She intervenes, exposes illusion, restores order, and breaks enchantment. So the central struggle is not simply good versus evil, but between two different models of female authority. That point is especially important because Alcina is not defended by male heroism. She is overcome by another woman. And that makes this opera very different from Handel's Alcina. In Handel's version, Melissa disappears and replaces by a male role, Melisso, who is Ruggiero's former tutor, but Melisso doesn't function as Alcina's dramatic equal, so Handel changes the structure of her downfall. In this Handel's opera, Alcina's collapse feels less like direct defeat and more like the unraveling of illusion itself. So in this scene, what we hear is not only Alcina's anger, we hear female power in conflict with itself. The piece I'm about to sing comes from Caccini version's final confrontation. First, Melissa breaks a portion of Alcina's magic, saving the people who had been transformed into plants. And I will play the video of Melissa's part. After that thunder, Alcina erupts in anger and vows revenge, and I will sing this Alcina's part. then the monsters on the island refuse that threat, seeing that Ruggiero will be punished. But the dramatic balance changed when Melissa enters again. She doesn't simply answer Alcina emotionally. She breaks the spell itself, and I will play videos for that part. And with the enchantment is broken, Alcina's authority can no longer hold. Her final response is not command, but retreat. One detail I find especially important is that Alcina's last line becomes more song-like than much of her early declamation writing. Earlier in the opera, her music often feels rhetorically free, forceful, and dramatically commanding. But here, as she sings that she must flee because she cannot resist the cruel fate, the musical style becomes more contained. I would hear that changed as significant. It suggests that her authority is no longer operating the same way. Part of what makes this line sound more like an aria than recitative is that the text started to repeat. Earlier in the opera, Alcina's line usually keeps the drama moving, and the rhythm often follows the flow of speech. Sometimes quicker, sometimes more flexible. But here, the repeated words and the more limited rhythm make the music sound less like direct dramatic speech and more like a shaped lyrical passage. Most of it is built from quarter and eighth notes. So this line feels more fixed and more controlled. Because the opera had already associated more constricted, song-like writing with siren, female attendants, lower social and rhetorical status. Alcina's final move towards the same kind of writing can be heard as significant. It suggests that her authority is collapsing not only dramatically, but musically. Also, in the last measure, the unexpected B natural adds one more sign of instability, as if the musical surface itself begins to give way with Alcina's authority. Her world doesn't collapse because of a heroic man. It collapses because another woman enters, challenges this logic, and breaks this enchantment. That dramatic structure is one of the clearest signs that Caccini's opera imagine female power as multiple, visible, and contested. And that's exactly what begins to change when we move to Handel. In Handel's Alcina, the anti-female reveal disappears, and the drama shifts inward. The conflict becomes less political and more psychological. If the previous scene showed female power in conflict, the next question is what happened when the power is wounded. This brings us to lament, a form of linked to grief and weakness, but one that can also create agency by giving suffering musical shape and dramatic force. In Baroque opera, lament is also a recognizable musical language, often marked by descending motion, especially the descending tetrachord. At the same time, Alcina is not just any grieving woman. She belongs to a larger operatic type, the sorceress, or the unruly woman. As feminist musicologist Susan McCleary argues, opera often allows such women great power for a time, but usually doesn't allow them to keep it. That pattern matters here because in both Caccini and Handel, Alcina's lament comes after the same crisis, the illusion that held. Ruggiero has been broken, and she begins to lose not only her lover, but the world through which she exercised power. That's why lament in these operas can be heard not only as suffering, but also as agency. In Caccini's opera, Alcina's lament remains closely tied to dramatic flow. She pleased, accused, and mourns, but her sorrow is not passive. It still reaches outward toward the people who has abandoned her. So lament doesn't stop the drama. It gives Alcina a new way to speak from within it. Let me sing Caccini version Alcina's lament. As you can hear, Caccini's lament remains outward and dramatic, restorative, active, and still embedded with the scene. Handel takes that same possibility much further. In area A called, grief no longer remains simply part of the action. It expands and begins to occupy musical time. Alcina is given space to remain inside lose itself. But what matters most is that the area doesn't stay in the one emotional place. It begins in pain and abandonment, but as it unfolds, Alcina turns back toward her own status, authority, and ability to act. So even within grief, she's not simply a collapsing, she's trying to recover agency. That's why I don't hear this area as pure helplessness. In that sense, lament doesn't erase her authority, it transforms it. Now I'm going to sing this aria without the da capo part. Taken together, those two laments shows two different ways of hearing female agency in suffering. In Caccini, lament remains active with the drama. In Handel, it becomes larger, slower, and more interior. And in Handel, that inward turn doesn't remain limited to lament alone. It becomes part of the opera's larger structure. Alcina is placed more fully at the center, and her voice carries more of the drama. This is one of the clearest effects of opera seria, where emotional experience becomes one of the main way dramatic action is shifted. The first example, the aria D col mio from Handel's Alcina Act 1, gives us not dramatic conflict, but emotional suspension. At this moment, Alcina and Ruggiero are still in love, and Ruggiero is still fully under her spell. The music lingers rather than pushing forward, and the love itself becomes the center of the attention. Even in this gentle moment, Handel is already shaping Alcina as a physiological figure. And I'm about to sing this aria, and I only will sing the A part. In this area, Alcina's power is still intact, but by the end of Act 2, in area Ombre pallide, she tries to call back evil spirits to stop Ruggiero from leaving her, and her magic fails her. What we hear now is not stable enchantment, but agency under pressure, a voice trying to command even as control begins to fail. And I'm about to sing this aria, Ombre pallide. In this area, Ombre pallide, the inward tone becomes much more intense. Alcina's control is feeling, and her voice becomes the place where that collapse is heard. The writing is more unsettled and demanding, and the virtuosic passages register agitation, desperation, and loss of control. So in Handel's opera, female agency takes a different form from what we heard in Caccini. It is less distributed and more intensely centered in a single voice. Alcina is no longer only a ruler of an enchantment world, but a heroine whose inner life becomes the drama itself. Both operas reveal something unsettling. Alcina is allowed to be powerful, seductive, and dramatically central, but only for a time. But even when she loses control, her agency is not erased. She remains musical control, shaping the drama through desire, grief, anger, and vocal presence. In that sense, agency here doesn't mean permanent victory, but the capacity to act, affect others, and command attention. Through Alcina, we heard not only two different musical styles, but also two different ways of imagining female power on the operatic stage. So this is my lecture recital for today, and thank you all so much for being here.